It's funny how nobody warned you that when you hit your 40s, it would feel like you're suddenly having to take inventory of everything you assumed in your life that would just work out. As I move through this process of building and rebuilding at this point in my life, there's this process that you go through of reevaluating your life, and somewhere along the line, you start looking at the gaps between the life you assumed would just happen and the life you actually have. Not because you failed, but instead because you thought you had time and you weren't actively choosing those paths. And by the time you looked up, you wonder how you got here and if this is actually what you wanted. It's a grief, a sadness about what could have been, and I think it's important to start naming it and sharing the reality of it. So hey, welcome back. My name is Angela, and this is the Millennial Rebuild. There's a certain point when you hit your 40s where nobody warns you that you actually start to really take stock and take inventory of your life up until that point. And it's not this crisis, it is mainly just this full on knowing that you are no longer in your 30s, you're not young anymore. And something that a lot of women start to think about, mostly because our biological clock is ticking, is having children or the fact that you haven't had children at this point. Um, it's hard to talk about because it's a really difficult subject. There are a lot of women out there who want to have babies and have children and can't. And I think there's a lot of women in a similar position to me where we have prioritized so many other things in our lives because we could. We could do it a lot easier than our parents and our mothers and our grandmothers. And so we took that and ran with it. And then suddenly you're turning 44 and you're realizing you might be experiencing these perimenopause symptoms. And you're like, oh, fuck, I really am at the end of this possibility. And that's a grief that I don't think enough women share out loud. Maybe they talk about it in their circles, or maybe they don't. Maybe they don't even want to share it because they feel like it's something that they are going through on their own. But really, there's so many women like us that have come to this place in life where we're like, I have to really start accepting the fact that children are not likely to be in my future. Biological children, of course, there's always other options, but the biological fulfillment of having a child, we really do have that deadline. And for a lot of women like myself, it really wasn't a full-on decision that we made. It was just sort of a pushing it off and pushing it off, and a series of not yets and I'm not ready and he's not the one, until suddenly we're sitting here at 44 and single, not even close to being in a relationship, let alone a relationship where you are able and want to have a child. Um, and suddenly this window is closing. And the grief of that is very overwhelming. Um, I have tried not to think about that too much, um, because it is difficult. And, a part of me has that, just like that tiny little smidge of hope that, I haven't fully gone through the change. And, maybe this year is the year that I meet the love of my life. And by some miracle, we're able to still have a child. Um, there is always that tiny little bit of hope in the back of my brain that that's still a possibility. And one of the things that I'm trying to come to grips with and really try to mentally and emotionally understand is that time frame is coming to an end. There is an end point. There is a point where it just is not going to happen. The window is closing. I spent so many years focusing on my career and focusing on myself, being selfish, which isn't a bad thing at all. You know, we are a generation where we are able to do basically anything that we want to do. And I think we really are trying to break that mold, both societally and in our families, of this expectation that women are just supposed to get married and have children, and that's just their biological imperative in the world, and that's all there is. And so you spend all of these years not really thinking about it, or maybe you think about it a lot and you just haven't run into situations where it had become an option. But for me personally, it was just a lot of years of not thinking about it, assuming that there would always be time, assuming that at some point I would meet that person. And that hasn't happened. And at 44, that's something that's really difficult to come to grips with. And the grief that is felt, it isn't just about kids or having kids or not having kids. It's about this unchosen outcome. And it just happened while I was living life, and suddenly it's out of my control. And of course, there's always that social expectation, the social aspect of all of this, where people, when you get to my age, even though it's a lot more common for women to not have children, there's still this social expectation of once you hit a certain age, that's just what you do. And if you don't have children, people assume it's either because you couldn't or you chose not to have them on purpose. And really, it's so much more complicated and nuanced than that. It's not black and white. Um, and while I can name this grief, it's not something that I can put neatly into a box, um, or fully explain and fully share with someone or with anyone, really. It's still something that I am working on understanding myself. And I think it's important that we start to understand and talk about this with others. And I don't know if women are talking about this with their friends or in their friend groups. Personally, this is something that I am still grappling with mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And so, even though I'm sharing this obviously on a YouTube video and in social media, I think it's really important we start talking about this and women start sharing this, because we are not alone and there should be absolutely no shame behind this. The next type of grief that I want to talk about is something that is actually connected to the grief of not having children or not being able to have children, and that's partnership. I talked about this in one of my first videos, where being in relationships, having a partner just has never been a priority for me. I've always had tons of friends who, I know this is going to sound bad, but I always thought, why is having a relationship so important to them? I just never really understood that. And part of that obviously comes from a hyper independence that I have, of relying on myself, taking care of myself, and not needing a partner, not needing a partner. This one took me a lot longer to sort of accept and think about and understand myself. You know, sadly, independence was just never a phase. That is just the default that my life has been. And it became my whole identity. And for so long, it felt like strength. Like, I'm strong. I'm a woman, that I don't have to rely on others to do what I want and to be me. And somehow, in these early years of my 40s, I've started asking the question, but is that actually what I want? Or has this just been a default mode for me for so long that I can't see my way out of it? Is this what I want? Or was it just safer and easier to keep to myself and be that independent person? And I recognize, even when I was doing it, that choosing solitude and defaulting to solitude because it is safe are two very different things. And I never really worked on understanding that. And I'm not sure that I always knew which one I was actually doing. These last few years, having a partnership, being in a relationship with someone was really put on the back burner, even more than I ever have before, because of other issues going on in life. And then suddenly here I am at 44, still single, living with my mother, um, very few friends to speak of. And I'm in this weird place where, again, that clock seems to be ticking. And I have to really start figuring out, do I actively want to pursue a relationship or partnership at this point? What would that look like? What kinds of adjustments would I have to make? I mean, when you've lived on your own for years and years and years and you are independent, it's very, very difficult to think about bringing someone into that space. I have created that safe space for myself, and to let someone in sounds terrifying, but I know that's what this is. I know it's part of being in a relationship and being in a partnership. But am I ready to do that? Even at the ripe old age of 44, am I ready to do that? Or do I accept that my life is going to go down a path that I didn't expect? You know, just like the thing with children. Growing up, I always expected I would have at least one kid, maybe two, the boy and the girl, and the great relationship and the great husband. And just this expectation that all of that was going to happen and all of that was going to turn out great. And that has not been the case in any way, shape, or form. And so now I'm really at this wall of having to take stock and try and figure out, do I break that wall down? Do I start to be more active and pursue um, a relationship or partnership with somebody? Or do I just accept that my life is going to look a lot different than I expected it to? And, you know, make peace with this alternative life. So part of this grief is not being in a place in life where I thought I would be, not having the husband, not having the relationship, but it's also a grief of not knowing. I am very single right now, and I still don't know. Will I be in a relationship? Am I ready for that? Am I going to do that? Is that in my future? I have no idea. And I feel like there's a lot of women out there who are exactly where I am. And I don't have any of the answers. But even in just some small way, I hope that there is this comfort in knowing that we are not alone. You are not alone in this. Now let's talk about the career grief. There's been a lot of content recently by a lot of social media influencers and a lot of people digging into this idea that we are having a millennial career crisis. And I completely understand and completely agree with that. We were sold this bill of goods when we were younger that said, if we get the good grades, if we go to college, if we graduate with these degrees, if we get a master's degree, if we get that great job and we work our asses off and we move up, that we will be successful and ultimately happy. And we built this idea around the fact that we needed those credentials and we needed that experience. And suddenly we are thrown into this world where we're stuck at a place in our jobs that makes us not happy, and we're trying to grapple with the fact that the society and the career landscape right now has completely turned upside down and does not fit and does not match what we were told we needed to do in order to have the lives that we wanted to have. And for a lot of millennials, especially, they have found that success. They did go and get those degrees and get that job and, found what they felt was success. But for a lot of them, it doesn't feel like we thought it should. Me personally, when I was younger, I always thought that I would get the degrees, I would do well in school. When I graduated, I would get a great job. I would, work for city or state government. I would work my ass off and move my way up and constantly get promoted. And I would hit midlife and I would be successful and have money and a house and a beautiful family and all of these things. And not a single one of those has happened. But the problem was, early on, I figured out that personally, I could not follow the same path as my parents, where you get into a job and you stay there. Maybe you get some promotions, but you stay with the same company for 20 years and then retire. I cannot do that. I am the type where I have jumped around to a lot of jobs and careers. I've been, I work in admin and operations. I've been a teacher. I've been a social worker. I've done all of these things, but none of it felt fulfilling. None of it fit what I thought I wanted or needed. And suddenly, again, I'm in this job where it's a great job, but it's not where I saw myself at this point. And so many of us expected to be at this amazing place right now, and we are not. And that's where this crisis comes in and the grief comes in, because we have not achieved what we thought we would. We have not reached those goals that we were sold, and the world is completely different. And now we're having to try and figure our shit out, all while going through midlife and really reassessing everything, not just our careers, not just the things that we do for a living. And that is so difficult. And honestly, these are just a few of the major griefs that I know a lot of women like myself at this point in their life are experiencing and going through. And one of the things that, it's going to sound cheesy, I read it somewhere, but I think it really hit, was the fact that because I am feeling this grief and this sadness and this disappointment and the frustration, all of these things, that is because I cared, because these were and are important pieces of being a human and living life. And to me, that's part of this journey. I'm sad because my career is important to me, and I'm grieving because the idea of children is still there in my heart. And at the ripe old age of 44, I am letting myself feel those feelings and feel that grief and that mourning of all of these pieces of a life that I thought I would have at this point. And I think that's important to do. I think it's an important step, because now I know more about what I want in my future, and I have the control to work on that and build and rebuild in a way that makes me feel good about my life. There's no shame. There's no guilt in admitting that you feel any of these feelings, or maybe you don't feel any of this. That is the beauty of life and being a human being on this planet. So while it's okay to feel the feelings and mourn and grieve and feel sad, it's also important to move through that and really start building in the way that you want to live your life now. So welcome to the rebuild. Let's get to it.